Shalom Aleichem, everybody welcome. The booming voice from the sky is back. So hopefully if you're sitting toward the back, it won't be difficult to hear me. If for any reason the volume changes, let me know. So, leaving now the period, Tisha B'Av, Tu B'Av, going toward the latter portion of the month of Av, heading into the month of Elul. We are in the in-between moment, leaving the whole psyche, the whole consciousness of Av, both the good and the not so good, and heading toward the month of Elul and all the promises that the month of Ani L'Dodi V'Dodi Li offers. However, because the theme of the class is to attempt to intertwine whatever themes are related that week, today we have a few. We have the Parsha. We are in Parsha Ekev. Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses our master, is continuing his discussion with the Jewish people, rebuking them in his very kind way for the various errors along the way from Ramses all the way to the Promised Land. Today as well, we commemorated the passing, the yahrzeit of the Rebbe's father, Levi Yitzchak, the famous Makubal, the famous Kabbalist of the last generation. He had 10 smichas from the Gedolim of that time, master Kabbalist who, while in exile by heart, produced so far 5 volumes of works, quoting every area and spot. It's an unbelievable accomplishment, with even more writings apparently still in ex-Soviet Russia, waiting to be discovered, translated, and produced, God willing. So we have the theme of Levi Yitzchak and his passing. And we also have the idea of the current situation in this country and where we are as a people, as a nation, and where we're headed. And all of these themes beautifully intertwine, and God willing, the themes tonight. Let's see if we can do it some justice. Let's begin. Parshat Ekev follows the theme of the book of Devarim, 5th book in the Torah, called Mishnah Torah. What is the entire section about? Moses saying goodbye. The leader that's now been with the people for 40 years. Remember, according to the age breakdown of Moses, the first 40 years, he was a prince of Egypt. The second 40 years, this is a little bit more surprising, king of Ethiopia. Did you know that? In the in-between, between leaving Egypt after being banished by Pharaoh, before arriving at the burning bush, in every movie adaptation ever made about Exodus and the events of Moses and the Israelites, they always seem to show a young, boyish-looking Moses standing at the burning bush. How old was Moses at the burning bush? 80. So God first says hello at 80 years of age. So if you're not there quite yet, in your early 40s or 50s, you're in great position. Okay? You're okay. You're right on track. You're getting to it. So, 40 years, Prince of Egypt. 40 years, King of Ethiopia. 40 years, King of Israel. So, burning bush all the way to the end of Zot HaBaracha, the passing of Moses, is a 40-year period. So, this is a section dealing with their great leader who for 40 years shepherded the people, saying goodbye and giving his advice to the people. How do you succeed? How do you venture beyond the Yarden, the Jordan River, and succeed against the 31 Canaanite kings and the 14 years, 7 years of battle, 7 years of apportioning, Yehoshua, the new leader? A lot is happening here. Let's start with the beginning. It opens with the following words. V'haya ekev tishmu'un et hamishpatim ha'ele. Translation, this shall be the reward when you hearken to these ordinances. In here, the word ekev means reward. Now, to anybody here who speaks Hebrew, has any decent Hebrew background, what is an ekev? Yeah, the heel, right? Exactly, the heel. It's an anatomical part, the lowest part of the lowest extremity of the body. The foot articulates into the heel. So I have a question. The Torah is very precise. It's called sifat echat. It never wastes words. It never just picks whatever word's available. It chooses the word with intent. Why do we have a word whose colloquial meaning is heel, being utilized here as reward? It's as if it says, if I dare even change a bit translation, this shall be the reward through your heel when you hearken to these ordinances. What is the connection? What are we talking about? So, no idea. So we're going to use the no idea as a great platform for building an idea. Let's start with the simple concept. When we talk about the Jewish people traveling in the wilderness, we mention that the people are going toward a certain destination. Where are they headed to? Israel. We all know, starts in Egypt, starts before, but starts really in Egypt, leaves Egypt, we end up 40 years in the desert, and we're arriving to the promised land. Eretz Zavat Chalav Udvash, flowing with milk and honey. That everybody knows. So the desert is really the consequence of A, being in Egypt and having to leave it, and 2, the sin of the golden calf, the sin of the spies, ending up 40 years detained in the desert. Punishment. They're stuck in the midbar. However, though they're stuck, and the consequence of desert is not because that's where they're meant to be, it's a passage. Leaving Egypt, desert, Israel. But in the writings of Kabbalah, this gets much deeper. We get into a much different understanding of this. When we speak about desert, the one thing everybody knows, having been even to local deserts here, Death Valley, local, California is a beautiful, beautiful spectrum of different landscapes. We have deserts. You go to Israel, I just came back, thank God, 14 days, 14 cities. We drove through our share of deserts. We know what a desert looks like. But Kabbalah teaches there's something called desert consciousness. There's a consciousness called midbar. That's one extreme. There's another consciousness, its antithesis, called bait. What is a bait? It's a home. Then there's a midpoint. It's not a home. It's not a midbar. It's called sadeh. What's a sadeh? Field. Field, right. So what we have now is this. We have a house, field, and desert. Kabbalah teaches the following in the name of the Arizal. When it comes to a house, when you walk through the threshold of the front door, most people who have basic observational abilities will know everything in the home belongs not to who? You. You walk in, the belongings of a home are to the Baal Habayit, Ba'alat Habayit. The husband and wife, the people who own that home, own its belongings. If I walk into the shul, Ohel Moshe, the minute I walk in that door and I see the mezuzah, or through any door here, any chamber here, I know this belongs to Ohel Moshe. Now, if I leave here and walk right into the main boulevard, that's called public domain. That's like desert, open. Anybody can claim it. Anybody can take it. The midpoint is like the sidewalk in the parking lot. It's sort of neither here nor there. It's not inside the actual home. It's not outside on the street. It's right in the middle. The Arizal teaches these three different domains that Jewish law, that halacha, spends tremendous time talking about. The tractate is Eruvin, Masechet Eruvin, delves into the various places that we talk about. Private domain, public domain, Carmelit, intermediary domain. These are actually spaces here. Private domain means those people who are conscious that God is one. Not one in the theoretical or hypothetical sense. One absolutely. We say a verse when we end prayer every day, 3 times a day. We say, Hu Elokeinu Ein Od. What's the translation?
There is no one Other than God.
He is our God, and there's none else. The Kabbalistic meaning of that is, He is our God, and not Ein Od Elilim. There's no other gods. It means there is nothing else. Whatever you think you see, differentiated phenomena, that form, that, it's irrelevant. What you think you see is not what it is. If you really could see it, there's nothing but Him. Ein Od Milvado. That awareness, that actual psychology of being able to see and experience that is endemic to only a handful of souls in every generation, called in the Talmud the B'nai Aliyah. So who are they? Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, whose great work, the Zohar, was actually published today. Well, yesterday now. Nighttime's already here. The Zohar was published. The Rashbi is one of them. Rabbi Eliezer, his son, is another. Rabbi Yitzhak Luria the Arizal is another one. The Baal Shem Tov, the Rebbes of all the various movements. These individuals are the ones that have a certain kind of inherent wiring that understand there's nothing else but Him. Hence, the first Rebbe of Chabad wrote in the book of Tanya, it is a bad idea to think of oneself as pursuing a title called tzaddik. He says, abandon the ridiculousness of that belief. Why? If you're aiming for up here, but your wired aptitude is here, and you never can get to a place of satisfaction because you've never actually assessed properly what your potential is. And you're overreaching, and every time you don't get it, you become depressed. That, according to the Alter Rebbe, is the reason people are depressed on a spiritual path. It's over-assessment of one's capabilities. A tzaddik is not made. A tzaddik is born. That's the difference. And those particular individuals in their wiring innately see and feel and experience that Echad Yichud Umiyuchad. God is one, God is singular, God is unique, and is nothing else. Now, for most of us, including myself, that's not my perpetual consciousness. I have moments where I'm spot on, moments where I couldn't be lower. Even for the minute, for the hour, for the week. Challenges. So, if one soul is called a house soul, everything he sees, everything he knows is God. The other extreme, desert, is what? He sees the opposite. He doesn't see God at all. He walks around the world and he's lost in the delusion that God doesn't exist. He lives in that place. Why? We call that level Rasha. What is a Rasha? Translation, a bad person. However, it doesn't really mean a bad person. The real meaning of it is Rasha Resh Ayin, a poor eye. He cannot see what is there. Hence, if you want to fix the Rasha, you have to show him properly what is actually there. If he's blind, you can't blame him for lack of vision. You have to show him what he doesn't see. The desert, no water, so to speak. No growth, no visibility of life. Desert consciousness does not see God. Now, there's a midpoint. Field, sadeh. Which souls are these? Field souls are both here and there. In Kabbalah, we are taught, whenever there is a midpoint, the midpoint grabs from the two extremes it serves to reconcile. Therefore, if the field is the midpoint between house and desert, that means it is both the house and the desert. Which souls are these? Us. Welcome to us. The world where some days you're in the house. You see God. You feel God. You know with certainty, with absoluteness. Other days, you couldn't be further. Merachuk nireli, from the distance you appear to me. So these two extremes collide in the very confused soul called the Benoni. Parenthetically, the whole book of Tanya, front page says, Sefer Benoni. The Tanya was not written about tzaddikim. It was written about field souls, understanding the psychology of one of which you are the collision point between that extreme and that extreme. Okay, so here's the question. If most of us are field souls, not perfect rectified consciousness, not lost in the desert of the delusion of concealment, we exist in the middle. So now comes the $100 million question. Why did the Jewish people spend 40 years wandering around in a desert? Even after the golden calf, they still had goodness in them. If they didn't have goodness in them, that would have been it. Desert. But no, they moved through the desert to the land of Israel. Why did we spend such a long period of time, decades, moving about in circles, snaking our way through a place called scorpions, snakes, and serpents in this week's Parsha? Why do we spend our time there? What are we doing there? So the Lubavitcher Rebbe develops an incredible thesis about the nature of where we need to be in terms of our spiritual mission. True, you are in fact field souls. You're a collision of both. But the mission of the Jew is the desert. To bring godliness even into a level called the desert. And what is the actual desert today? What are we talking about? All of the secular environments that don't have a sense of Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. The mission of the Jew is to bring that in, to manifest it there. So, on a very simple level, I walk out every morning from the shul, I've davened, I've studied, I've done all my spiritual preparations, I walk out to the public domain, to the desert of our current existence, and now the mission begins. How I talk to people, how I relate to people, how I'm walking, how I'm moving, how I'm sitting, how I'm eating, everything is now being scrutinized as an expression of a higher consciousness at the desert level. Our mission is to transform the desert into an oasis. Says the Rebbe, it's not hard for an intermediate soul to feel God. We're wired that way. It's no chidush for a tzaddik to see God. He's wired that way. The chidush is to bring God even into a desert and firmly implant him there. This is why, by the way, as a side note, if you look at the Hasidic movement, the movement of the Baal Shem Tov, the movement called Hashra'ah, inspiration, was to push everything out to the furthest extremes. So if a Jew ends up somewhere in the middle of nowhere, there is somebody waiting with matzah, a shofar Rosh Hashanah, Torah books, you name it, it's there. Bringing the godliness into the level called the desert. That's the mission of the people. That's our mission. So when someone says to you in the future, okay, Jew, what is a Jew? A response should be very simple. To bring God's absolute singularity even into a desert. Thank you, goodbye, and walk away. Don't do that. You can continue the conversation. But that should be the answer. Bringing godliness even into a place called desert. That's the mission. So now, if we go back to this idea of traveling in the desert, in the book of Psalms, there's a verse that says, Ta'u b'midbar, derech Shimon, that the people went astray in the desert. The word is ta'u. Now, simple level is we are not exactly, as we know from this parsha and all the parshas before, an easy people. We challenge everybody. We challenge everything. We challenge Moses. We test God 10 times. We're a challenging, frustrating, stubborn, kashe oref, stiff-necked people. That's who we are. Love us or hate us, that is who we are. And God knows that. So guess what? The Jewish people, in actuality, are a people that have a very, very deep complex when it comes to our spiritual relationship with ourselves and others. But in the desert, that outside world, that world that we're talking about, that's where ta'u b'midbar. We don't go astray in the shul. Put a Jew in a shul, put a Jew in the land of Israel. Put him by the Kotel, the Western Wall. Put him by the cemetery up in Sfat. Put him somewhere holy, and the holiness comes to life. Feels it. Stick the Jew into a public domain, into the banks and the circuses and the common everyday world. Now the challenge begins. That's where ta'u b'midbar, we end up going astray. So the purpose of the Jew is to realize, I can't compartmentalize. I have to bring what I know over here into over here. That's the mission, to be consistent. Now, I asked a question to start the class. Why do we call this parsha Akev? Here, reward, literal meaning, heal. The Tzemach Tzedek, the third Rebbe of Chabad, explains. It's also brought in Sha'ar Gugulim of the Arizal and other places. If you imagine the anatomy of the Jewish people in terms of quality of soul as being something analogous to the human body. The human body has, looking at it, if you just imagine the proper anatomically positioned, correct posture of a person, and you look at head, chest, lower extremities. If you ask anybody, what is the most spiritual part of a person? Answer? Brain. All of it comes out of here. A good friend of mine, who actually passed away, alav shalom, a while ago, he had a good friend of his who's a neuroscientist up in Washington. And he once asked him the question, how does vision work? And he said, simple. You look at something, that lights up, visual cortex lights up, and you see. He was joking. It's so complicated. So just to understand how anything works, why a certain chemical or a neurotransmitter or electrical signal produces our subjective vision of reality, that's a great mystery, the great problem that's called in philosophy. So the brain is spiritual. All of our books, all meditation, everything we do depends upon the brain being part of it. Now, if I go down a little further, what would be the next more spiritual place? Not as spiritual as the brain, because this part can go a couple different ways, but still spiritual. Heart. Brain to heart. Heart and lungs. Right? All meditation involves breathing. We have many, many, many books in Kabbalah and Hasidus about the art of breathing and how to breathe and how breathing plays an integral role in prayer, meditation, etc. Heart. People talk about heart, emotion as a spiritual quality. Breathing. Drop lower, okay, stomach, liver, gallbladder, spleen, intestines, digestion. We don't really associate that with spiritual. It feels physical. It's a physical thing. It's a bodily thing. Drop lower than that, lower extremities down to the feet. If I take my shoe off walking around the environment, what is the first thing, if I'm walking, if I'm ambulating, what's the first thing to touch the ground in a normal step? My heel. So one can make the argument, in the anatomy of the soul, the most spiritual, the brain, secondary, the heart, tertiary, digestion, and very last, all the way down to the heel, that's the first actual thing to touch the ground when you're walking. The lowest possible part of our spiritual anatomy. So Torah comes and says, every part of the human body relates to a certain category of soul. There are souls called the heads of the thousands of Israel in the Tikkunei Zohar. So these are souls who are the leaders and the guides of a generation. They have the vision, they have the mindset, they have the understanding. Then there are souls called heart souls, loosely translating. Who are they? The emotional ones. When they pray, when they emote, you can feel it. The love of God, the fear of God. Then there are souls that come from lower places. They're very physical. If you talk to them about prayer, meditation, God, abstract ideas, for them, it doesn't really ring true. Talk about charity. Talk about things that are physically, materially of the world, no problem. They can converse with you. They're physical. Then there are souls who are so physical, so down into the actual ground, like the heel, that one would swear that there's no godliness there at all. They're so physical and they're so unaware, you can mistakenly think there's not much going on. But as the Rebbe points out, what part holds up the entire body? So much so that if the mind says, go do something, if my will says, go forward, without the feet and that heel stepping on the ground, you can't go anywhere. So the relationship between the lowest and the highest is closer than one may think. So the heels are a very high level, unbeknownst to themselves. Now, We began by saying that the opening verse reads like this: "This shall be the reward when you hearken to these ordinances. V'haya ekev tishma'un." Another way this can be read is as follows: V'haya ekev heel tishma'un. When the heels will understand. When the heels will hear. According to the Kotzker Rebbe, this is actually the verse talking about our period right now, the Messianic, pre-Messianic era, called the heels of Mashiach. Very close. Not there yet, very, very close. We feel the turbulence. We feel the chaos in the world. Things are changing, shifting, challenged. All of this is called heels of Mashiach. So the reading of this can actually be when the heels themselves will comprehend. So the pshat is, when the people you know that don't want to hear anything, don't want to know anything, don't care to know anything, and persist down a stubborn road of being a stiff-necked people in the wrong direction, when those people begin to hear and feel it and just know there's something more, then you're living in the era of Mashiach. However, the deeper reading for us is, how do you know when you're truly doing your job in the desert? When even the heels begin to understand. It means conditionally that when you and I talk about spirituality, we don't talk about spirituality only in the sense of my spiritual brain, my spiritual heart. We also see my hands, my feet, my heels, the lowest parts of me are part of a glorious spiritual anatomy. It's all spiritual, from the top to the bottom. We have to condition ourselves to become this way. How does one condition the heels? How do you spiritualize a heel? I get the brain. You learn Torah. I get the heart. You pray. Avodat halev. I get the hands. Do acts of kindness, charity, etc. How do you spiritualize a heel? Okay. In the metaphorical sense or literally? Both. Both. Exactly right. The Ramak, the leading Kabbalist and Sfat before the Arizal's arrival, writes in his book Tomer Devorah. He says, the ones practiced in the esoteric wisdom understand that even if they had, back then 400 years ago, the choice to ride a horse toward whatever destination they were going to, or walk, they prefer to walk. Why? The horse is much easier, much more convenient. Why walk? Our sages tell us because every step toward a mitzvah itself is part of the actual mitzvah. So even the walk to go there, your heels touching the ground, heading toward the right direction, is actually the spiritualizing of the heels, the fixing of the heels. Which is interesting because when you ask somebody, do you keep Jewish law? We don't say to them, do you keep mishpatim? Do you keep dinim? What is the universal term for keeping a religious life? Halacha. Do you keep halacha? What does the word mean? Walking. Are you walking? It's funny how in the actual language, we're not asking, are you thinking? Are you feeling? Are you walking? Are you doing it? So guess what? We actually are taught that the guy who says, or the girl who says, I don't want to go. I don't want to pray. I don't want to learn. I don't want to know anything. If that person can walk with you down the street toward the shul, or towards something meaningful and spiritual and Torah-oriented, you are rectifying the consciousness of the heels. That is messianic. That's where it comes to. It's not about making everybody a scholar. If that were the case, we will never be redeemed. How many will sit in the yeshiva for 25 years and learn to the depths of Talmud, the depths of Kabbalah? Not many. That's a very tall order. But how many people can walk down the street? Everyone. It's just walking. This is why, if you notice something, when you build your sukkah, coming up soon, when you go to Shul Yom Kippur or Rosh Hashanah, and you invite people over, and I have a house where when I invite people over, it's a vast spectrum of people. So why would somebody want to grace their table with an inexperienced moron who bothers the whole proceedings? making bad jokes, doesn't understand the rhythm. Why do that to yourself? Why bring that guy in? And the answer is because there's no moron. The mistake is we judge it according to who knows what. But if the mission is v'haya ekev tishma'un, when the heels understand, just get that guy to walk in. Get him to walk in, and already environmentally, you're going to improve the situation. In fact, the Chida, one of the greatest of the Sephardi mystics, writes a famous commentary called Petach Enayim on the Talmud. And in Tractate Chagiga, he actually explains, he says, sometimes a student who's not so gifted intellectually will sit down in a room and look into something. And suddenly he has this incredible insight into something that he thinks he did. I did that. Wow. What he doesn't know is in the same chair 24 hours before, a certain chacham, a scholar, walked in, sat down, and learned. And that individual who was mining insights out of the Torah, our traditions that we speak the Torah, as he spoke the insights, breathing it into the air, inculcated the environment with a sage's insight. So when this lesser individual sits down, he becomes imbued with it. And now he has the experience of being a chacham, even though he didn't do it. He didn't put really any effort into it. But he had the insight. It was available. It was floating around. When you bring somebody to your home, when you walk them into the shul, walk them down the street, it's literally taking the one part of the whole generation that can be affected, irrespective of background, knowledge, lack of knowledge, Hebrew, no Hebrew, it doesn't matter. If they're walking down the street, heading toward a meaningful destination, rectifying the heels with the proper trajectory toward the right involvement, you're doing your job. You're spiritualizing the heels. Now you might say to me, what's the proof? There's a very simple one. The word is Akev. Ayin Kuf Vet. What is the gematria? What is the numerical value of Akev? To those who know. What is it? 172. Kuf, 100, Ayin 70, Vet is 2. 172. So if a person says to you, the heel, lowly, physical, earthly, go, yes, but the value of it, 172, is the exact number of words in the Ten Commandments. So suddenly, not so physical, suddenly, just walking down the street, you're telling me my heels have the Ten Commandments in them? Yes, because what happened on Sinai? God descends on the mountain, chooses a mountain. Even stranger, chooses 2 stone tablets. Not diamond, not the second pair, sapphire, stone. Evan, ordinary stone. Why imbue the most sacred moment in Jewish history on stone? Give it something beautiful, something magnificent. Why stone? So the sages say, if the godliness does not reach the level of stone, you've not done your job. If the physical walls, the Rabbi used to say that if you get a tzedakah box, endeavor to affix it to the actual wall. By attaching it to the wall, the whole house becomes part of it. The goal is transformation of the environment, changing the physical world itself. Indeed, in Kabbalah, we learn that when a person walks down the street and he's thinking Torah thoughts, the very movement of his feet elevates divine sparks out of reality that have been trapped there since the beginning of time. Just walking and thinking. He does a tiyul. He's just walking down the street, but he's thinking. Even that conditions the world. So, we don't need to have everything. We just need to have learning the walk, keeping halacha. Using the feet toward a holy direction is enough to spiritualize the entirety of the person. Now comes the question. Long before we had the heel of the Haya Akev, what is the first heel ever mentioned in Torah? Earlier. Think back to the very Very beginning. Got it. That's it. The snake biting the heel. Kol hakavod. Shapir kemoshe. Just like Moses himself. Snake biting the heel. Remember, it's the curse. Because of what you did, you will bite his heel. He will smash your head. All right, so the simple meaning of it is, if I step on the snake, then... But why did the snake hit the heel? I mean, it could hit many places. Did you ever see a snake in like National Geographic? These things can leap and bite your stomach. It's not always the heel. Why? You will bite the heel. So, the time of the snake, there was no such thing as a split between the head and the feet. There was no such thing as a disconnect between the idea that the highest parts of me and the lowest parts of me are part of the same spiritual system. They flow as one, like in circulation. Your heart beats, the myocardium contracts, and the blood goes everywhere. It goes to the head, locally, and to the distal extremities, fingers and toes, everywhere. So, spiritually, it all flows. In the Garden of Eden, there was an absolute awareness of the unbreakable continuity of godliness from the head to the feet. Then came the snake, came the first challenge, and a breach took place. So what happened? What's the essence of that breach? You, the snake, will be able to bite and to inject your venom at the level of the heels. Meaning, practically, the Jew who's bitten by the snake, you're not going to affect his head. He'll think spiritual thoughts. He will have, by his very nature and design, spiritual yearnings, existential wants. You won't be able to take his heart. He'll still have godly emotions. You talk to many Jews on the street, they understand love of God, fear of God. They feel basic emotions that are godly by nature. You won't be able to bite his hands. He'll still be a charity giver. He'll give a lot of charity and acts of kindness still. But you will be able to bite the heel. You'll be able to inject a toxicity into the part of him that's meant just to walk down the street and model the behavior in the everyday world. Consistently, continuously. So we don't have to worry about head, heart, lungs, stomach. But the snake's bite is dafka, the heel. So, in Kabbalah we are taught there's something called anti-power. Power and anti, it's called zelu umadzeh in Kohelet. The word for snake is, which word? There's a couple, but this is the classic one. Snake of Eden is called Nachash. Nachash. The word Nachash is spelled Nun Chet Shin. Value 358. Same value as Mashiach. They equal each other. Why? Why does snake equal its complete extreme antithesis? One is the absence of God, as it were. One is the revelation of God in fullness. So how could the two have the same value? So our sages say, because if you ask the question, how do you bring Mashiach? It deals with the snake. If one can rectify the snake, one can rectify everything. And the snake's main target, the main focal point on your body, is the heel. It's aiming for the heel. It doesn't want you to walk. It doesn't mind if you sit and think about things. It's fine. It doesn't matter if you have a nice heart. It wants to go after your heels. That's the target. Because if it can stop the Jew from walking down the street and moving through the world, modeling the behavior, then there's nothing left. Because what does God desire? The desert. The walk and the journey in the desert. Take it to the lowest point of reality and infuse it even in the level called the heels. So to rectify the snake, to rectify this condition, take more walks. Means walk down the street and realize that when you put a kippah on, or tzitzit, or just the way that you sit and the way that you walk and you talk exemplifies the Jewish behavior in the public domain. And the Rambam said it very clear. He said, true wisdom is discernible not by what somebody knows, by what somebody does. How they think, how they sit, how they talk, how they walk, how they eat, that's wisdom. Wisdom is not going to be, he's a smart guy. He's an innovative guy. There's many smart, innovative people that are just not good people. This is smart and innovative, but in a way that marries the head with the body, completely, down to the feet. So I shared the story before. I'll mention it one more time. I heard it from Rabbi Yitzchak Ginsburg, that when the Lubavitcher Rebbe would walk down, and again, I cite the Rebbe because the Rebbe is one of the few tzaddikim of the current generation, only 20-something years ago, that we have documented evidence of. It means that we saw it, we were there, we witnessed it. The videos are there. People are still here talking about it versus 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago. Lubavitcher Rebbe, when he would walk down the street, he would always walk in a certain pattern, a certain way he would go. And on one particular occasion, the Kundalini movement was growing rapidly in New York, back I think in the very early 70s, late 60s. The Rebbe took position as Rebbe, I believe, in 1950. So on this particular day, the Maharashi had actually flown from India into New York for the purpose of educating this growing movement. This is exactly how I heard the story. So apparently being shuttled to his destination, he had to pass through 770 for some reason. The taxi or the chauffeur took him through, and as the car was passing through, the Rebbe came out of a door and went the other direction. But the Maharashi saw him. He caught him. He had the individual stop the car, and he asked the driver, "Who is that man? I demand to know." And he said, "I don't know him personally. I just know that he's a famous rabbi in the area." And the Maharashi looked, and he said, "He is perfect in the 24 forms of yoga." Now, I guarantee you, the Rebbe knew nothing about yoga. That is tradition, right? So we have to ask the question, what did the Maharashi mean? What's he talking about? So the Frierdiker Rebbe once explained the difference between Greek philosophy in the traditional sense of the Socratic method and talking about high-minded ideas, and Rambam, Jewish philosophy is. Jewish philosophy is not called done until Rosh v'Guf. The head and the body are one. In the time of the Greeks, there were often individuals that would think very high-level thoughts, walk out of the little theater in which they would entertain their intellectual abilities, and then do very, very bad things. So that's a disconnect. True philosophy is the head and the body are one. The Maharashi saw not a yogi. He saw the purpose of what yoga is engineered for those people, to connect the way the brain is in its harmony and its balance with the way the body moves. One master could see it in another. How he moved is what caught his eye. So we have to realize that if the snake can take the heel and disable the foot, as it were, and we fail to represent these principles to the outside world, then we end up in a position, God forbid, where we have to compartmentalize. Very bright on the inside, spiritual when we daven, good when we're with each other, but to the outside world, we're failing to model the behavior properly. It is how you walk, it is how you sit and talk and eat and speak with people, and even the slightest thing, the littlest thing, of somebody stopping and saying hi in the street, the gardener, the mailman. It's how you respond to this that will indicate, do you own the heels or does the snake own the heels? Who has it? And that's the real competition. So if we take it one more step, we can say that every single person in this room is gifted with the ability, thank God, to walk. Some can walk miles, some 2, maybe more, maybe less, but we can all walk. And the walk that we have to do is to remember that when you go outside starting tomorrow, it's not just about what you say. Model the behavior. Remember, even your walk must be about this. That's the truth of how we integrate spirituality down to the feet. Now, if we go to the next level, we can say, Mashiach's arrival now depends not on the next breakthrough in Torah, the science of Torah, not in the next book of Kabbalah to be written. Mashiach's coming depends, v'haya ekev tishma'un, whether your heels understand this, whether the way that you walk brings it. That's messianic. The prophets say in Mashiach's time, never again will a father teach a son or a son a father. They will all know me. Just know it. But to bring it to that level, we have to bring it down to the level of the heels. That's the ikar. That's the target of the entire system. Which is why we're not called as a people Beit Avraham. We're not called Am Yitzchak. What are we called? Beit Yisrael, Beit Yaakov. Did you ever wonder why, unlike Abraham, who was Avram, who became Avraham after Brit Milah, why wasn't Yaakov given the same courtesy? Yaakov, first name, later Israel, Parshat Vayishlach, and then right away he's called again Yaakov. Hashem goes back and forth between Yaakov and Israel, interchangeably. With Abraham, once it's changed, it says in the Talmud, it's forbidden to call him by his first name. He's like a ger, like a convert. You can't remind him of his past. He's through. He converted. He's now Avraham. Leave him alone. Don't say Avram again. Yet with Yaakov Avinu, the founding father, the chosen father of the 12 tribes, we don't give him the same courtesy? He's called Yaakov and Israel together? So now we have the ultimate answer. That's Hanzer Rebbe explains in Divrei Chaim. If you look at the two names, they're exactly top and bottom of the body. The name Israel is a permutation, as the Arizal teaches, of Rosh Li. What is Rosh? Head. What is Li? Mine. My head. I have a head. I have a head. Yaakov. What is Yaakov? Akev. Heel. Grabbing onto the heel of Esav. So Beit Yisrael, Beit Yaakov means we have to be both simultaneously. You have to be the level of the head, thoughtful, contemplative, learned, growing spiritually, but you can't forget the heels. That's why our chosen father is both. To add one more little spice to this, Paparot Lechachma, we say that on Rosh Hashanah, which is coming very soon, almost 30 days away. Unbelievable. We're back again in Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is coming, and when you pick up the shofar, to sound the shofar, in the Siddur, there is one name that we meditate upon that's connected to the shofar. And it's called Kara Satan. What does Kara mean? Right, to rip. To rip. Kuf Resh Ayin. Satan is the Satan. Lisaten. It causes you to go astray. To tear it up. That's shofar. So, it's pointed out in Kabbalah that when the two names of Yaakov and Israel, he's both the head and he's the heels. A complete partsuf, a complete body. When those two are added together, it equals exactly Kara Satan. There is no Satan left if the Jew can reach a level where head and feet become one. As long as that's not the case, and there's compartmentalization, there's a rift between the two, we're vulnerable. It has to be the thoughts. Mindfulness is important, but better than that is walking. Which is also why the shofar itself, by the way, has both. You have a big end, and you have the small end. We'll get more into this during Rosh Hashanah. The big end is the Lamed of Israel, the biggest letter of the Torah that reaches up. The very smallest end, the little tiny mouthpiece, is the Yud of Yaakov. It's actually a topographic example of Israel, Yaakov together in one. So we need to remember that, yes, we should study, Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. Yes, you must daven, Avodat Haleh, but even more than that, walk. Walk down the street. Be that person. Sit like a Jew. Talk like a Jew. Don't just rely upon history. You be that person. Like in Pirkei Avot. In a place where there's no men, you be the one. You be the Adam. You represent the principles. So that's why this parsha is called Akib, because we are dealing now with the desert, and the importance of it is, says Moshe Rabbeinu, we must bring the level into the desert, into the level of your heels. Until then, you can't own spirituality because you're still fractured. It must be unified. One body, one corpus, one entity. If we can reach that, Mashiach. We're done. And that's why Mashiach equals Nachash. Because in Mashiach's time, even the Nachash changes fundamentally. Even that level, that lowest possible level, metamorphosizes into a much higher level. Okay, so now we're going to go into a question-answer period. How much time do we have left? Okay, so let's give it 10 minutes. If you have to go is fine. Now it's completely open questions. Not only on this topic, any topic. For 10. Yes, sir. Say it again, one more time. Yes, so he mentioned about how one of the verses in the Parsha that's most expounded one probably in the Parsha is, a man will not live on bread alone, only the words that come from the mouth of God. Okay, so, the Arizal actually teaches that's the verse that tells us everything in your physical world. What is today the colloquialism of bread? If I say to you in simple English, I'm going to go, money, I'm going to go make bread. Bread is money, right? Bread is the money aspect. So it's funny how it says in the Torah, you will not live on bread alone, either the physical aspect of bread, the basic staple of human existence, or its extension, money, physicality. But the words of God, what flows out of the divine mouth. So the Arizal teaches us actually what it means is when you eat the bread or you go for the money, remember, it's not just about the levush, the garment of the bread or the money. Rather, chase after the letters of creation that are concealed in the actual bread. Meaning, if everything we know in creation comes from the 10 utterances of Genesis, let there be light, let there be this, we have 10 of them. And everything in creation derives out of that, all the way down to the most basic, simple physical thing. That means that God's words are in everything. So the meaning of it is, do not chase after the physicality alone, reach the godliness and clothed and invested in the experience. How do we access that practically? What do we do before we actually partake of anything physical? We make a blessing. The anatomy of the blessing is what digs into the physical consciousness of the experience and pulls letters out. That's actually why you say, what's the first word of any blessing, no matter what the blessing is? Baruch. What's Baruch mean? Blessing. So if you break it into two parts, bar means outside. It's the targum of outside. Vav kaf uch, bar uch. Vav kaf actually equals Hashem. The same value as Hashem. Yud and Hey, Vav and Hey. So what is a blessing? To bring to the outside godliness. That's the meaning of it. So every blessing is about to avoid the problem of eating by bread alone. You want something physical? Good. Physical is allowed. But do the physical thing, making sure that the letters of the divine mouth, the pinimut of the experience, is being accessed and drawn out. That's the meaning. Okay? Next. Challenge me. Anything. Howard.
Sum it up for a layman like myself.
Far from it.
If you're going to talk the talk, you must walk the walk.
Right? And in a way, we can even say by extension, if you can't talk the talk, who cares? Walk the walk instead. Means that if I can't pontificate loftiness, I can't impress with my sagacity. Okay, so what? Just walk down the street, think and say, thank God I'm a Jew, move down the street, walk, and bring it with you. If you're doing that, you're inculcating everything in the world with the walk. That's the key. Just walk it. That's the mission. If you can talk it too, even better. then you can walk and actually teach at the same time. But can you walk, chew gum, and talk? That's the question. But the walking is even key.
But again, in the layman language, my understanding of the whole class is that God is giving us the hills to walk. And He gives us the commandments. He wants the hill to follow the commandment, but He also gives you the chokhmah to direct it that way.
That's right. If we can bring...
So He's giving the whole thing.
Absolutely. And that's why every single person, no matter who they are, top or bottom, nowadays, in this current climate today, everything is available. You have books in English, books in Hebrew, books in Russian, books in Spanish. You name the language, there's Torah books now. It's no longer the generation of, if you didn't know fluent Hebrew or Aramaic back in the days of the Talmud, you had no access to that wisdom. The original reason why you actually had, as we all know from shul, you go to shul, you do the Amidah, they do the repetition of the Amidah, right? Well, the simple reason for that, says the Kuzari, is because back then, nobody could afford the books. You didn't have enough books going around. So they would say it once, do the repetition, you would say amen to it, and then you would be included in their blessings. So we're in a generation now that's so different. Every bit of knowledge you could ever want to learn on any topic, halacha, Gemara, Zohar, Chassidus, Musar, it's all available. The Ben Ish Chai once lamented and said, this is after the printing press came out, he said, now we live in a world where books are everywhere. He said, and yet, Shulchan Orech, the table is set, he says, every good thing you can want is there. The meats, the wines, the pastries, you name it, it's all there prepared for you. There is your plate, spoon, fork, knife, napkin, everything. And yet he says, you don't even want to grab the fork and put it into the food and put it into your mouth. You are lazy. That's what he says. He says laziness is the big problem. It's not availability. That's why actually the snake, as an extension, represents of all of its traits. What is the food of the snake? What's it like to eat, says the Torah? Dust. What's that mean, dust? So explain the sages. The ayin, afar, the dust, is atzlut. Look at what dust is. It's heavy. It settles. It's earth. It's heavy. Laziness is heavy. It weighs down. So the one thing the snake can do in its bite beyond cripple the walk is cripple the ability to feel the passion to sit down and partake of the meal. It's right there. You're looking at it. There's a bookstore in every corner now. And yet, to go in, to buy the book, to sit down, read the book, there's a laziness there. It's not our fault. It's just part of the condition of exile. So we have to defeat that and be hitgaber on it, rise above it. So yes, very, very important that we can walk that walk, but also make sure that we defeat the emotional side of it that often is self-defeating, like laziness. Yes, please.
Thank you. So, there's any connection between the word akev and the word delay? Because akev is also mean to delay, or even akev, I don't know.
Yes.
And then they say that we got the door akev, so is that related?
Very much, because delaying, if you look at like a complicated medical case, and you ask the question looking at the medical case, what would be the thing in the condition that could delay or prevent convalescence? So whenever you do a diagnostic analysis, you don't just ask what's there. You ask what could prevent rehabilitation? What could prevent me going from here to here? I can do this, but what's blocking it? So it could be something as simple as compliance. He just doesn't want to do the work. Or it could be more complicated. Certain underlying medical conditions that block the efficacy of that drug or that procedure. Well, if you ask the question, what can delay Mashiach's coming? So it's the heels. The same thing that can bring it could delay it. So if I choose to walk down the street and embody these principles, I'm expediting it. But if I choose the opposite, to not do it, it won't be because of lack of thinking or lack of good heart, but lack of doing, of walking, of moving with it. That could delay it. But I think, again, this is why I'm very, very optimistic in the fact that whenever I go to shuls or see these different programs, there's an influx of people coming in that know nothing. They just walked them and dragged them in there and did it. That's key. The Rebbe used to send people out during Rosh Hashanah and Sukkot with shofar, lulav. Because if it's a Jew and it walks, he shakes lulav. If it's a Jew and he walks, he hears shofar. Everyone hears shofar. If it's a Jew and he walks, he puts on tefillin. It didn't matter. I was actually with one time a shaliach that was hiking on a trail with me. And he met this guy and said, "Are you Jewish?" He goes, "Yes." And I'm an atheist. He goes, "Perfect! You're the guy I've been looking for my entire day. Want to put on tefillin?" I goes, "Okay." Another friend of mine who actually was going to UCLA medical school. No, he was actually going to pre-med at UCLA. And he looked as frum as you could. Long payas, long beard, seat 10 times longer than mine. And he would ride the scooter and fly back over here. I mean, he's like a Jew poster. So he ends up in this class, in a biology class, and apparently the teacher did not like the fact he was so Jewish. He turned out to be a Jew himself. But the whole class was antagonizing him. "Why do you have that beard?" Picking on him. But he's messing with Chabad. You have a big problem coming now. So after he's been picked on for the entire class, some would get resentful. He just decided to take matzah and walk to the guy's office and say to this person, "Excuse me, would you like, it's Pesach's coming in about a week or two, would you like matzah?" "Get out of my office!" Throws him out. Goes, "Okay, no problem." Next day, same time, same office. "You want the matzah now?" Throws him out again. By the 5 times he went back. 5 times. "Fine, I'll take the matzah." And he actually ate the matzah on Passover. That's the walk, right? This guy knows nothing about the matzah. But all he knew was, I should be doing this. It's just to get rid of him, I'm going to eat that matzah. And apparently, a couple days later, he said, "Look, I finished the entire box of matzah." So that's the point is, to tip the scales to redemption, we don't need to look for the perfect Jewish condition. We need to just tip the scales. Enough people doing the right thing with the right energy does the job. So it's not, I used to think it was like mission impossible. How are you going to have a generation of people like Rabbi Akiva or Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi? It's impossible. Nobody does that. No one's like that anymore. But when you reduce it back to, but it's just walking. People can walk and eat matzah. They can come to the sukkah and just sit there in the shadow, the tzel of the sukkah, and enjoy the meal. It's not that hard. But we have to promote it and do it actively. That's the idea. Okay? Any more questions? Thank you for coming.